All right, welcome everyone. Great to have all of you joining us today. We are going to hang out for just a minute to make sure that everyone can join and get settled in. We have some amazing guests today, so be sure to grab a drink and a snack so you don't miss a thing. I'm coming to you from Bozeman, Montana, where we are having some lovely snowy weather. Colton, how are you? What's going on in Portland?
I'm good. It's unfortunately a little rainy here, but other than that, I'm doing well.
Perfect, great to have you. Justin, how about you? How's Massachusetts?
It's a little chilly and sunny out today, so it's about 40 degrees. So we've got shorts and a t-shirt on.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that sounds lovely. A few weeks ago, it was like -40 in Bozeman, so I feel like
Oof.
anything above zero, we can't complain about now.
Can't do that. That's
Yeah, I'm from northern New York. Anything above like 35, 40, it's shorts weather. So
Yeah, sun tanning.
you
All
guys are,
right.
you guys are crazy.
Well, it's just past the hour, so I'm officially going to get us started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Arno, and I'm the Director of Sales on the XYPN Business Development team. Today, I'm thrilled to host this event, Podcasting 101 for RIA owners, why and how you can leverage this powerful tool with XYPN members Colton Etherton and Justin Green. I have just a few housekeeping items to go over. If you have any questions for us to address throughout the session, be sure to submit them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of Zoom. That's just a little bit easier for me to monitor than the chat. We do have some questions that were submitted beforehand, so we will be answering a mix of both those questions and any asked live throughout our conversation. Also, when the webinar is over, you will be able to fill out a survey through Zoom, and we would love to hear how we did. We also are always looking for topics for ideas for future events, so be sure to fill it out and include those. We do host a free webinar every month, so next month be sure to join us for Creating a First-Year Budget New RIA Owners Can Stick To, presented by XYPN Executive Business Coach Maddie Roach. This will be a great one, so be sure to register for that in the chat. Last thing, for the first time, we are hosting a solution spotlight that is eligible for CFP CE credit. Usually these events are behind the member wall, so this is a big deal for us. So you'll definitely want to join us on February 20th for the Great Cash Flow versus Goal-Based Financial Planning Debate. Determine what's best for your clients. That is a long title. And that will be featuring Investment Money Guide. All right, enough with the boring stuff. Let's get to the reason you all are here. So Colton, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little about your firm and your experience with podcasts?
Yeah. So my name's Colton Etherton. I'm out here in Portland, Oregon. I launched my firm in January of 2021 through XYPN. I currently work primarily or mostly with tattoo artists. I made that change about 8 months into starting my firm. And shortly after that, I did launch my own podcast, Tattoo Wealth, that ran for not sure how long. I paused it for a little bit and hopped on with Justin. But it was mainly interviewing tattoo artists and their story, talking some finance questions, as well as guests that had relevant content to tattoo artists. So insurance agents and buying a home and that kind of thing.
Great, very cool. All right, Justin, how about you?
hey everyone, I'm Justin Green. I run Assist Financial Planning out in Massachusetts, the greater Boston area, which means not really Boston, but nobody probably knows where it is, so we'll just call it that. I launched same time as Colton, actually. We were in the XY launch group together. So 2021, maybe. I think I'm coming up on 3 years. When I first launched, I launched the Dollars and Dumbbells podcast to go with it. I was originally niched down on online health and fitness coaches. I've kind of broadened that niche over time. So it's kind of more online business owners and young families, just in general now. And so Colton and I teamed up beginning of this year, maybe a little bit towards the end of last year, and rebranded the Dollars and Dumbbells podcast to Intentional Profits. And yeah, that's what we're doing today.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start with how you came to decide on launching a podcast. So what were you doing for marketing that was not working? Like, how did a podcast cross your mind as like the next thing that you wanted to try to do? Justin, you want to start us off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I launched in 2021, my now wife was travel nursing during the pandemic. So I wasn't local anywhere and I was running a virtual firm. And so I didn't have a very big network of online health and fitness coaches. So I thought, well, how am I going to get like in front of these people and have conversations with them without just being salesy and like blowing up their DMs? And so I launched a podcast because, if I came to Amy's, DMs and said, hey, I want to talk to you about business, you're going to be like, get the hell out of here. But if I came to you and said, hey, Amy, I really love your story, would love to have you on as a guest on the Dollars and Dumbbells podcast, so you could share your story, would you be interested? It was almost always a yes. So I wasn't doing really any other marketing at the time. That was like the first marketing channel that I really launched. I was on socials and Instagram and stuff, but the podcast was like the first big launch that I did with any marketing, just because I needed a way to get in front of people in my ideal audience. And there was just, I don't think there's a better way than to just bring them on as a guest and allow them to talk about themselves, rather than them thinking like, hey, let me talk to you like for an intro call, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And did it work? Did you convert some of those guests to clients?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's worked. And I think, I saw some of the pre-questions that came
Yeah.
over, and maybe it's too early to hop into this, but I think as an advisor, it's important to consider like what your goal is when launching a podcast. If you're trying to be like the next Joe Rogan, like, okay, good luck. And probably Colton and I maybe not your best like coaches for that. But if you're looking to launch a podcast to hit an ideal target market, that one either may just give you expertise in that market, or two, allow you to be introduced to people in that market, which over time could bring them on as clients. Then that's probably the route as an advisor that you need to be looking at. And so understanding that your goal isn't like a high volume of listeners, but really like a small community of the right listeners.
Right. I love that. Colton, how about you? What was your journey to launching a podcast?
Yeah. I mean, similar to Justin, I mean, to be fair, we were texting probably almost every day at that point and talking similar marketing tactics. And also similar with my niche, I'm not a tattoo artist. I wasn't deeply in that community, you know what I mean, and knew a bunch of people. And so it was a way to connect and build relationships, and understand kind of their struggles, and a lot of artists don't answer DMs, but they would answer DMs when we were talking about telling their story.
Okay.
That was kind of cool. And then at some point, some people would reach out and ask you, like, "Hey, this is cool. Could I? what's it take to be a guest on here?" But the main thing was just, build a community, build some relationships with people in that community. I find a lot of their stories fascinating, so I wanted to have those conversations anyways. Like, how'd you get into tattooing? Like, it's not a typical career path. How'd you get here? And so that was a big part of the conversations, and then, taking it from there. So it was more, I think, curiosity on my end. Like, there's a marketing piece to it, sure. And I know I'd be able to share it on Instagram where I did most of my marketing and, share the videos. But a big part of it was just curiosity with the people that I wanted to talk to.
Right. So you both had interview style podcasts then with people that were in the niche that you were also looking to serve as financial advisors.
Yep.
Got it. Perfect.
Either in the niche or like serving the niche.
Mhm.
So I've brought on finance people, like insurance people, et cetera, that could speak to the niche as well. But that was definitely like later on, tried to establish a little bit more of like niche interviewees. And to Colton's point, like if you're using video based marketing such as Instagram, which him and I have both kind of been on there primarily from day one, when you share that interview or a video or a clip from that interview and you tag that guest, they're probably going to reshare it, and so you're getting in front of their audience, which is going to be, think of it like advisors. How many advisors are in your network? A lot. So if you have a tattoo artist sharing their interview, there's a lot of other tattoo artists following them. So now you've found a way to get in front of someone else's audience, which is really the name of the game name of the game when it comes to marketing is how do you like get introduced to more audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. So from a purely like nuts and bolts standpoint, so when you decide you want to do a podcast, what's the first thing? So you come up with the title. What how do you actually get it out into the world on Apple Podcasts? Like talk us through what some of those logistics. Colton, you want to start there?
Yeah. I mean, I kept it really simple. So I used Anchor as far as like distributing it and getting it out there. So I mean, Anchor, I think it's a Spotify company technically, but you can,
It's
push it.
been bought by Spotify, so it's called Podcasters by Spotify.
Okay.
Uh, so I host the podcast now that Colton's not doing. So he
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have known that, but they rebranded a couple months ago. Anchor got bought out, so it's called, I
Okay.
think it's Podcasters by Spotify now.
Okay. Yeah. So, but it's super easy, to get it out. I mean, you could do it as simple as recording on your phone. I think it allows you to like record on your phone app even for like up to 30 minutes. So like if you wanted to do as bare bones as possible, hit record, start talking, push it out. I think other than that, I mean, if you're doing video, like Justin and I are big fans of using Riverside because it's a little bit better quality than Zoom. And it's meant for podcasting. But yeah, I mean, so pick the title, and what you want to do, an image, right? It's going to be on the podcast cover. And then as far as that goes, like some programs make it super easy to get it out there and to get it out to every place that you want it to without having to take multiple steps.
Great. That's really helpful. So do you edit these podcasts? I mean, how much is there AI to help you do that? Like how involved do you have to get on that? Justin, you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, I just dropped a bunch of links too in the chat. So same as Colton, I launched using Anchor, then became podcasters for Spotify or whatever it's called. Super easy. They walk you through it. All you do is you upload the file, you put in an episode description, it goes live to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you want it to go. Those are the two main ones. I recorded with Riverside because of the video quality. You can do Zoom, that's fine. But if you're putting out video clips, the clips aren't going to be as good. So if that's part of your strategy, then I would do Riverside. It's like $19 a month, pretty cheap. Anchor's free, by the way. And then once I recorded the episode, I did minimal editing. If there was like a mess up, I would cut it out. If there was a very long pause, I would cut it out. But for the most part, like it's a conversation. Like I think people worry too much about fully editing that, and you really don't need to. It doesn't need to be highly produced. And I would use a software called Descript, which I dropped in the chat. I think that's like another $19 a month, and that's a text-based video editing tool. And there's a lot of tools that now do this, but this is one of the first ones where basically like you upload the files and it like transcribes it and you just edit it like it's a document. So you can just like select, cut type thing. It uses AI, so like yeah, you're using AI, but you don't have to like go use AI, right? Like it's built in. And so it can cut out like long pauses automatically. So there's a lot of little tools that you can edit the podcast very quickly, especially the audio side. If you want to cut it up into video clips, I use Descript for that as well. That takes a little bit longer, but it's still pretty easy and seamless to do. But I think people worry too much about like having it be this like high quality production. I would say focus on having like pretty good audio first because people tend to tune out if the audio is not great. So I would at least have maybe like some headphones to start, or go buy like a cheap mic online. Like in terms of tech, that's all I would really worry about in the beginning. You don't need the most expensive podcasting mic, but you could probably go on Amazon and get one for like $100. I think the Yetis are like 120. That's what I did when I launched. I literally launched from a side. I was in a rental in Naples, Florida. We were on a travel assignment. I pulled in the kitchen chair. I took all their little like tchotchkes off of an end table in the hallway, put that in a room. That was my desk. And then I just bought a mic off Amazon and that just became my podcasting setup. I don't know what's going on here.
Your Zoom is very excited about that.
Yeah, pretty
Um,
pumped.
okay, that's great. So when you were thinking about your individual titles and then your new title now, Intentional Profits, how did you come up with that? Did you do some research on like SEO at all, or how did you come up with your titles? Colton, you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. I don't, it was a while ago, but I don't think I put too much thought into the title as far as looking up SEO and that kind of thing. I think my research was really sending text to Justin and say, hey, what do you think about this? Is this stupid? Does this work? So asking Justin and then asking my wife, I think was the extent of my research on that. So nothing crazy.
Got it. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, mine was asking Colton and my wife. I had a lot
Very
of names that yeah, I had a lot of names that I liked, and I would tell my wife, and she's like, "That's terrible." I really like the alliteration, so finally I settled on dollars and dumbbells. She was like, "That's not half bad." And I was like, "Okay, we're gonna go with that then." Which I actually kind of fell in love with the name. A lot of people in my niche liked it. So really, you're just trying to find something that one really kind of highlights what are you talking about, right? If you're talking about money, then something in there should show that you're going to be talking about money. And then if you have a very defined niche, then you should also have some type of keyword to define that. You know what I mean? So like dollars and dumbbells, money and working out. That was pretty obvious. Tattoo wealth, pretty obvious. Intentional profits is maybe a little less obvious, but what we've kind of shifted towards is working with the online business owner, solopreneur types that are maybe not chasing like the hustle and grind culture that we see on social media, but are being more intentional about the profits that they have in their business so that they can live their best life. So that one takes a little bit more of like diving into, but at the end of the day, it's still obvious that we're probably talking about money.
Yep, absolutely. And now for your like episode titles and descriptions, does any of the software that you use help with that? Do you do that on your own? I guess we had a question about how do you optimize those for search and for digestibility, that kind of stuff. Justin, you want to
Yeah, I
talk to
mean,
us about
first
that?
just get started. Like, I think people worry too much about optimizing things. Like, just get started
Yeah.
to see what resonates. You'll start to see, what types of episodes get listened to more. Like for example, sometimes I'll do like 4 ways to, right? And those tend to pop off a little bit more because it's easier to digest. If you're really worried about it, look into like how to write a good hook. So that will help you write titles as well. Because essentially, if someone's scrolling through their podcast app, they're looking at titles. So you just want to hook them, like something catchy that will be like, oh, that sounds interesting. Let me listen to that. Because most people aren't going to find you in search unless you have a big podcast. So they're already going to be following you. And then it's a matter of, okay, how do I get them to listen to my podcast compared to the other 10 that populated today? So it's really just like coming up with something that's relevant to the episode. You don't want to like trick them because you don't want to be like, how Colton made $1 million in 3 days. And an episode like is not about how Colton made $1 million in 3 days because you'll lose trust in audience. But figure out like what's the most like juicy part of the podcast episode and like the overall theme, and then just put that into a title that will hook people.
Right. Well, that's super helpful. So what metrics do you get to see on the other side? Like, how do you decide if it's doing well, if it's continuing to meet your needs? So Colton, what were you looking at what was like success for you in this area?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting one because a lot of people, right, they want like the big plays, a lot of listens. And I think that ultimately depends on who you're targeting, right? And of course, time doing it. Like, I mean, like anything, we're advisors, right? It's going to compound over time. It's going to take a long time to do it. But I would look at, number of plays and kind of when those happen as well. Because you can see, when that takes place. And for me, like I wasn't looking for a huge number of plays every time, but I wanted to be somewhat consistent. You know what I mean? Because I knew my target market was going to be pretty narrow because tattoo artists, it's already a small group. And then I'm looking at tattoo artists that want to actually listen to a 30 to 45 minute podcast about money. or some other artist story. And like, you know what I mean? It just keeps getting narrower and narrower. So I would look at plays, but I also try to not put a ton of focus on it, because I'd drive myself crazy.
Right. That makes sense. We did have a question at what pace should you expect a healthy podcast to grow? So how did your podcast grow, Colton, over time?
I'll be honest, it's been a while since I
Sure, no
stopped
problem.
and I looked at the analytics on that one.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything crazy. I mean, the interesting thing I remember from like as I was wrapping it up, the most played episode I think was still the first one.
Wow.
Even after I have it pulled up here, I think I did like 23.
Okay.
And so I don't know why that was the most played one. Maybe it was the guest, but yeah, it was interesting to look at that. And I don't remember growth rate or anything like that, or I only have a couple reviews like on Apple. Like that was cool too. Like, oh, can I get some reviews on there? Again, not expecting a lot, but if I get one, that's a win.
Yep.
And the other metrics was like other people replying to like the videos on Instagram. You know what I mean? Those are a little hard to track because I'm not looking in the podcast metrics for that. But people responding, or people, I had a few people that they requested to be on the podcast. So to me, like that was a bigger win than the number of listens on the last week's episode.
No, that's
So
great.
that tells me at least something was resonating and someone's interacting with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Justin, how about you? Like, what did success look like? How did your podcast grow? Talk to us about some of those metrics.
I'll let you know success when I get there. I'm trying to pull open my stats, but I've done 120 episodes and I have about 4,000 listens. So we can all do the math there. That's not 100,000 downloads or listens per episode. So to Colton's point, I think you have to be careful how you're evaluating this and understand like what's your goal. Are you trying to become a full-time podcaster? Then you should probably get your listens up because that's how advertisers are going to pay you. If you're trying to build an advisory firm, then it's going to really serve a couple different things, right? You want to have the right people listening to it. You want to have the clips because then you can put them on social media. So I'm really more concerned about like, okay, who's watching this on social media? Because they may never listen to the podcast, but they're viewing it. A lot of people aren't going to listen to a 30 to 40-minute episode. People who are going to listen to it are probably very like they're hooked. Like they like you. They're probably going to reach out to you. Or it's like your family, and that's who's listening at the beginning anyways. So I've been doing it for like 3 years. If I was solely based on like listens, I probably would have given up by now. First 6 months, I mean, expect like nothing. You know what I mean? It's a long-term game. Anyone who's like, I want to launch a podcast because within 6 months I want to have, a whole bunch of listeners, just don't launch. Like you'll save yourself the disappointment because it's a long-term play and you need to be consistent too. Like I put out an episode every single week, I think, except for 1 week when my daughter was born last year. Like you have to be consistent. You've got to show up. You got to put in the reps and understand what the goal is, and then you can figure out what KPI you want to measure. So I'm not too worried about the listens, but I more care about like the social media views for those episodes.
Great. Well, let's talk about that next then. So how do you market your podcast? So Justin, you said you put it on Instagram to go on your website. How do you get your podcast out in the world?
Instagram's always been my primary channel. So I'll cut it up into usually like 3 to 4 clips. And I'll put those out on social media or on Instagram. YouTube Shorts, I also put it out on sometimes. It's easy to just duplicate it if I just put the same clip out there. Sometimes I'll put out a little bit of a longer 1 to 3 minute clip on LinkedIn. I've kind of gotten back into LinkedIn recently. I kind of ditched it for a couple of years. So I'm focusing more on that now than I was before. And then when it was Dollars and Dumbbells, I hosted it on my firm's website. I haven't been hosting the Intentional Profits one on that website just because Colton and I run 2 different firms. Haven't fully figured out like what we want to do there. So it's just on, Apple, Spotify, etc. You can get it there, but we don't have like a website per se. But if you're running your own podcast and you have your own firm, I probably would link it under like a resource tab or like a learning tab, or where people put their blogs. I would take your podcast, I would link it there, and even you could use AI to do like a little quick transcript, like a quick summary. So it's essentially a blog post on your website, but it'll link to the podcast. I would do that for sure. That's what I did for like the first 90 episodes when I had like the Dollars and Dumbbells podcast.
Oh, great. And what kind of metrics were you looking at there? Were you looking at increased site traffic or number of views on Instagram, or what were you monitoring, if anything?
I didn't look at the website at all. I kind of just parked it there. Yeah, I mean, I just parked it there. At the end of the day, we're advisors. If you pay too much attention, you're going to get lost in the weeds. On Instagram, I'm more looking at like shares. So did the guests share it? If they did, I'm going to double down and put more out there, because some guests will share it and some, unfortunately, like they're just too busy and they just don't share it. And the most listens I always got on an episode was when the guest shared it with their audience. So it tapped into a new audience. So that's what I was really trying to do, is like, what can I do to get this guest to share this on their story? So really making sure I pick a clip that highlights something shareable on their end, right? So don't like only pick the clips of me talking, because you would think, oh well, it's my social media account, I want to pick me talking. It's like, no, I want to pick like the clips that highlight the best attributes about the guest, or like the most interesting story about the guest, and put that out there, because they're more likely to share that with their audience. Audience is gonna be like, oh, who's Justin Green? Like, who are they talking to? Oh, cool. Either like to Colton's point earlier, hey, I kind of want to go on that show. Like, hey, Justin, can I come on? Or they start following you, and that's how you'll grow kind of an audience on social media.
Great. That's very helpful. Colton, sounds like you also use Instagram for that.
Yeah, that was my primary way of sharing it. Tattoo artists are not on LinkedIn at all. So that's off the table for me. Even Twitter, X, whatever it is now, Facebook, like they're not very active on there. So Instagram is the big one. They have their big followings and everything. So that's just where I stay 98% of the time.
Perfect.
I think another thing to highlight, because if you're listening to us, you're probably like, these guys like don't even care about their metrics. They're not paying attention. It's like, that's not really the point for us, because you have to do some type of marketing. And I know personally, if I didn't hold myself to a consistent podcast schedule, which then gives me the videos to create content, I would go weeks without creating content, because I just like, it forces me to have content to then put out on social media. And I know if I didn't do it, I would just sit there and have this like writer's block. If I was trying to write on LinkedIn, I would have writer's block, or I'd be like, oh, I'm going to record this video tomorrow, or I'm going to record this video tomorrow. And you kind of like always are trying to figure out like, what should I talk about? But when you have a podcast, and especially the interview style, it just happens naturally. For me, at least, this might not be best for everyone, but for me, I can hop on and have conversations like easily. And so then it makes the content creation process for me a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. We did have a question of how do you come up with enough content to fill 30 to 60 minutes on a regular basis? So interviews is an easy way, but not all of yours are interviews, right? So how else do you guys come up with the topics you're going to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think interviews, yeah, those are a little easier, as long as you get a guest that responds. There was one or two where you ask a question and they just give you like a 2-word answer, and you're like, okay.
Sometimes it's hard. Yeah, like the guest matters.
Yeah. So those aren't always the easy button. But other than that, I mean, Justin and I, like for Intentional Profits, again, talking throughout the week in between recordings, like, hey, this came up with a client, maybe we can talk about this situation, right? I only did, I think, one solo episode where it was just me talking for a little bit. And I know some advisors almost prefer to do just like a solo episode, them talking about some kind of financial topic. I found that to be extremely difficult, and I was way more judgmental on myself for that, as far as editing and the whole thing. Yeah,
those are really hard. those, I would like, we've talked a lot about interview style. So anyone who's listening, thinking about solo style, those are way harder in my opinion, like to agree with Colton, because you do have to come up with the idea. Then you have so much like control over the product that you want it to be perfect. So you try and over edit it, you do a whole bunch of retakes. And then like you also have to be like really engaging for someone to listen to just you for a half an hour talk about finances.
Yeah.
Like, wake up, that's boring. I know we're advisors, but people don't love to talk about money all the time. And so unless you're super engaging, those are really hard to do. If you're going to do those, I would actually stick with more of like 5 to 10 minute episodes. I've seen those work out better for solo episodes. But if you can find someone, if you want to do that style, if you can find someone like Colton and I to just like have conversation about a topic, I think that works a lot better. And then to Colton's point, like, how do you find the topics? Like, what questions are you being asked? Like, what are clients asking you? What are prospects asking you? What do you just see people asking on social media? Like, answer those things.
Yeah, current events. We talked about was it Mint shutting down recently and talking about how I'm implementing Monarch. And so like little things like that just come up, and then what's going on. That's the other thing I'd say. If you do like the short solo episodes, it's probably easier to do some kind of current event, the update. As long as you can make it fun and you're not just honestly boringly repeating the current event news. But yeah, that's what's happening with your clients. What are they asking you? We try to keep a list of things that we've been asked or things that have come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And for someone that hasn't launched a firm yet and maybe wants to like bank some podcast episodes, if you're hanging out where your niche is, then you're going to find those questions. Like, we have our VIP Facebook group for XYPN. That's where I get so many topics like for these kinds of webinars, is just to see what people are interested in hearing about and what they're asking in that group. So yeah, if you don't have clients yet to mine their questions for your content, then join some social media groups where they are hanging out so you can be a fly on the wall and get some of that stuff.
Yeah, and just I think most people would even be approachable, if you're like, hey, I'm going to start this business. Here's what I'm thinking of. Like, can I just ask you a couple questions? What are your issues when it, or your questions when it comes to this? I think a lot of people would be open to having those conversations, and then you just keep that running list and you can go down and answer those and repeat.
Yeah,
to repeat things. Topic.
Absolutely.
Because chances are people didn't see your video from yesterday, so you can post the same thing in a different way and it'll hit a different group of people.
Yeah, that's actually really important. It's really hard to do because you feel like you feel like you don't want to repeat yourself. But the most people that are most successful at marketing, they find like 3 to 5 things that really resonate with their target market, and they just repeat them all the time. They find like a new way to repeat it. Like, they don't say word for word, but they just repeat it all the time. And I just heard an exercise recently on a podcast I was listening to, and I think this could help anyone who's like, I haven't launched yet, but I want to like bank some ideas. Take like the 6 core financial planning topics: cash flow, investments, insurance, estate planning, etc. And then just list out 10 questions like per topic that are like the most common questions you've heard clients, prospects, people out in the world ask. And then you've got 60 topics right there. Like, just answer those.
You can also go to answerthepublic.com, and it's a good tool to use.
Great. I love that. Thank you.
You can go to ChatGPT too. I mean, you can use AI to go on there and say, what are 10 popular topics about, financial planning for doctors, right? If that's your thing. Or what are the 10 biggest financial pain points for doctors? And you might get like 10 ideas, and 3 of them might be pretty good. So there's a lot of ways, don't limit yourself to like just being like, what should I talk about today? Like, find a way to like prompt some ideas.
I love that. So someone had asked before, I'm looking to begin building my podcasting acumen after attending this event. What would you suggest for my next steps? So for someone that is trying to bone up on this information, like, what's some other resources that the two of you have used? Justin, you want to kick us off?
Oh, just listen to podcasts. Like if you're,
Yeah.
that's a hard one. I don't have anything like specifically that helped me create the podcast, but I've been listening to podcasts for God, I don't know, since XYPN launched there. So whenever like the beginning of that was, I remember I first got into podcasts around then, and I binged all the XYs before I left and started my own firm. So if you're like, if you don't listen to podcasts, then I don't know, starting a podcast maybe doesn't make sense for you. Like if that's not like where you hang out, then maybe hanging out there and trying to produce there doesn't make sense. So honestly, I don't have anything specific. I just listen to a lot of podcasts so I can learn from hosts and how they interview and the types of questions they have and the formatting that they have, and I can apply that when I'm talking to people. Honestly, any type of resource, if you're going to do interview style, any type of resource on just like building relationships is helpful.
Mhm.
I don't know. You have anything like actually tactical there, Colton?
No, I was just gonna say, what podcasts do you like to listen to that are the style that you want to create, right? And then just take notes on what you like about that. Like just instead of focusing on the content of whatever, that certain episode, just say, hey, what do I like about this interview style? Like, what is it that is catching my attention outside of just the content, right? Because it's not just the content. There's something there that the interviewer is doing that makes you, or I don't even want to say interviewer, the podcaster's doing, right? That makes you want to listen. For example, like the 50 Fires podcast that Carl Richards has put out recently. Like I like how they pause and he kind of is talking about the conversation and then they go back in, right? So that's like a different style. It keeps your attention, right? So what is it about the podcast that you like that keep your attention? How can you emulate that in a way that makes sense for what you're trying to do?
Yeah, honestly, the biggest tip I would have is like just go record. So like just open up your phone and record yourself. Because if you've never done that before, that's gonna be really awkward. So
Mhm.
go do it, go practice, record a couple episodes that maybe you never release. But don't wait to be perfect before you launch your first episode. Nobody's listening. Like literally no one's listening. Maybe your mom's listening, but other than that, first episode, nobody's gonna listen. So don't expect it to be perfect. Just kind of launch it and put it out there. And a good first episode can be just like an intro to what you're planning on talking about, like who you are, what you're planning on talking about. Because to Colton's point, a lot of people do actually go back. If you have that like intro episode, I do find that a lot of people, when they find your podcast, even if it's like 2 years later, they go backwards, right? And so you're building this constant Rolodex of content. I don't think that was the right word. Anyways, you're building this like constant like bank of content that people can go back and listen to. Um, and so they will do that. I have like my most listened to episode was like over 2 years ago, and I still get people going to that episode to listen to it. And it's just a guest that's pretty popular in the online health and fitness community. And so I still get people who are drawn to that name and they go listen to that. I don't know if she has it linked somewhere because it's still, yeah, it's like still brings in listeners where I'm like, okay, I don't like know who's going back 100 episodes to listen to this, but she may have linked it somewhere, right? She might have mentioned like, hey, I was on this podcast here. And so maybe people are finding it through her as well. I'm not sure. But I would just get started, like start recording. And if you're doing an interview and you have your own firm already, like make a list of who you would want to come on and then ask them. I've only been turned down once.
Wow.
Mhm.
And you would be surprised. I expected when I first launched, and so probably everyone listening is like, no one's gonna say yes. I was like, no one's gonna say yes. And I've been turned down once, and she was like, just not a good like fit for me right now, but here's 5 other people that I recommend you reach out to. Like, okay,
Wow.
cool. Um, so people will come on because people love to talk about themselves.
It's very true.
That's how
Are
you
there
got Colton on here.
are there any compliance considerations with hosting a podcast? Like, does it have to be in your ADV? Do you have to like monitor the conversations for anything specific? Talk to us about that, Colton. You want to start us?
Yes,
Um,
Colton, you can start.
I saw the head scratch on Justin's side. Um, Man, that's a good question. I honestly, I can't say 100% one way or the other, right? I think that ultimately will depend on where you're registered, how you're registered, and that kind of thing. Um, for me, I have the recordings, I have the content, it's there. I'm not typically talking anything investment wise or anything either that like crosses that line. Like for the most part, my conversations are, tell me about how you got into tattooing. What's that, what was that like? What was the struggles? What was the whole thing? And I had some questions at the end. Like I had a list of I think it was 5 questions. They were kind of like at the end, I'm going to hit you with these 5 questions quick. Like, what's the first thing that comes to mind, right? And like one of those was like, what does wealth mean to you? What was the best piece of financial advice, whatever you got from somebody? But I didn't dive too far into the weeds on topics. So personally, I wasn't too concerned compliance wise, if that makes sense. And even
Yep.
with Justin and I, we don't go super far into the weeds, right? Like the episode about Monarch and budgeting that I mentioned earlier. Like we just talked about how I'm planning to implement it with clients, what that's looking like, why why I want to do that, the importance of understanding your spending. But it was nothing like to that point where it's like, this is, we're not talking about the markets or anything like that.
Got it. Justin, any other
Yeah.
compliance thoughts?
I'm not a compliance expert by any means. We do have a disclaimer. So as soon as you listen to the video, you'll get like 30-second intro, and then it's like, Justin and Colton are both the advisors at registered, blah, 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 blah. Their advice, what you hear them and the guests say are not reflective of blah, blah, blah. Go listen to like 5 other advisors' podcasts, and, they've all got the disclaimer, and you can kind of form your own, just kind of like a CYA type thing.
Forgot about that.
Other than that, when it was linked on my website, I mean, that's archived. So,
Right.
If the regulator wants to listen to it, I don't think the regulators can go back and listen to 120 episodes, but I could be wrong. Did not talk. I'm not a big investments guy to begin with. I'm more financial planning focused. I offer investment management, but it's not like a big selling point for me. So I don't really go into investment topics. And if I do, it's education only. I think if you just use common sense, don't guarantee anything on there. And just use common sense, and you should be okay. And then just be able to, if the regulator were to audit you and say, well, I want to see these, should be able to provide it to them. The good thing about a podcast is there's not like ongoing communication. So it's not like someone's DMing you on Instagram and you have to archive that type of thing. It's a one-way channel. And as long as you can just give them the episode, it should be fine.
Yeah, for sure. If anyone is worried about compliance, just talk to a compliance consultant and they can
That's
see if there's
probably
any...
what we should have said.
Yeah. No,
that's
it's not. No, it's great. It's great. But yes, to be clear, none of us are compliance experts. So if anyone's worried about it, please talk to someone that truly knows. And I'm sure they can help. Okay.
There's a lot of advisors with podcasts. So, I mean,
yes, for sure.
You should be fine unless you're working for a firm. Mm-hmm. And then you obviously need to check with them in their compliance department on what their rules are.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, pre-submitted question. Another concern that I have is about protecting intellectual property as well as other unknown risks with podcasting. So I think this means putting ideas out into the world and not being able to protect them. Maybe have you guys thought about this, or how do you mitigate this? What are your thoughts, Justin?
Honestly, if whoever submitted this is actually on here and want to expand on this, I'd love to kind of answer more. But I saw this question beforehand. I didn't really know what it was referring to. Unknown risk, obviously I don't know them, so I can't handle that. Intellectual property, everything I know is pretty much on Google, so I'm not too worried about that. So I mean, I would love to answer it better if whoever submitted it's on here and wants to expand a little bit, but I'm not 100% sure, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I get you. They say, I'm imagining a possible internal and external model. So that is does exist in the world. Like celebrities will have a podcast and then maybe also a Patreon that they pay for. So maybe there's some of your content is free that you put on the podcast, and then maybe you have a podcast just for your clients. I don't know. Maybe that's what they're talking about. But Colton, do you have any other thoughts on this?
No, I mean, that could be, right? Like if you have an internal version for clients that's maybe a little different. Maybe in that case, if it's hey, I'm putting out this internal podcast where I am talking about investments or portfolio returns, but it's specifically for clients, what happens if it gets out? I honestly can't answer on that. I'm not sure how that would work. I haven't really heard of anyone doing that. I know, like, again, I mentioned him earlier, Carl Richards has another podcast where, it is like a paid for thing. He's like the only person I know that does that. Obviously, it's not for advice clients, so there's no compliance thing there. There's another part to that question in the beginning. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Protecting IP as well as unknown risks.
Oh yeah, I'll give away everything. I'll give away everything. I mean, the fact of the matter is most people aren't going to do it anyways, by themselves. I'll have calls with artists and tell them, exactly what business bank accounts I like to use for my clients and the whole thing. And if they sign on, great. If not, then they don't. So like I don't have any hesitation personally of giving away the house, so to speak.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you. What about quality control? Like, when you're listening back to an episode, have you ever been able or not been able to post an episode or decided not to because it wasn't good enough? Like, what are some of the things that you're looking for as you're like establishing consistency? Justin, you want to talk to us about that?
The only reason I probably wouldn't submit an episode is if I felt like it misaligned with my brand, or if after having the conversation, I felt like it just wasn't, I didn't really want to be associated with the guest. I mean, it happens, you know what I mean? You get someone on, you see their story, you're like, hey, this is really cool. And then you kind of start talking to them and you're like, like this person's a little shadier than I thought. I mean, in the online business world, it's reality. Like there's like some weird things go on, right? And so the more you talk to someone, sometimes you're like, ooh, so if that's the case, you can always cut things. If they say something like, for example, I've had people like mention crypto and I'm like, yeah, I don't recommend that. Like, if they specifically say like a recommendation, I'll cut that because I'm not recommending that. And I'll tell them after when we get off, like, hey, I'm going to cut that because, I'm regulated. Blame everything on the regulators if I have to. It's just an easy cop out. But I'll just be like, hey, I'm regulated. Like, really can't give recommendations. So I'm going to cut that part about crypto. Oh, yeah, totally cool. Fine. So that's pretty much it on that end. And I don't think I've ever like completely scratched someone. Even the bad ones where like Colton said, like sometimes you really have to pull, like you're pulling teeth. Those ones are tough. But I think I've always launched them because usually there's something in there that people can take away. And I'm my harshest critic. So usually like I'll talk to people and be like, what'd you think of that? And they're like, they didn't notice. And where I was like thinking like, oh, this was a flop. And they're like, actually, I thought like it was pretty good combo. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So you're kind of your harshest critic. So I would just, if you get too worried about that, like you're never going to launch. You'll just be stuck in like paralysis analysis.
Yeah. I mean, we've scrapped an episode together. Like we recorded a whole episode, and at the end,
that's right. Yeah.
Like that sucked. Like we shouldn't put
that.
Yeah. Like we just.
That's right. We did do that.
Yeah. And then like I've had tech issues with some, of course, where it's like the guy kept dropping and he'd have to get back into the meeting and like I could have pieced it together, but I'm like, we're not going to do that. So in that case,
if the audio is bad, you've got to either redo it or scratch it. Like people will not listen to really bad audio.
Yeah, if the audio just starts out bad right away, it's game over.
I've had instances where there may be like a really quick section at the beginning that I notice the audio is bad, but then it kind of fixes itself. And I'll kind of hop on an intro and be like, hey, like bear with us for 5 minutes. Like you're going to hear dogs barking or this or that, or like the mic is kind of messed up, but it fixes itself. Like bear with us for 5 minutes or just skip ahead to 5 minutes. Combo is really good. You're not going to want to miss this. So just like kind of let them know like, hey, I know the first 5 minutes sucks, but like the rest is going to be good. Don't tune out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. So let's see. I just want to answer
one thing I wanted to add in there real quick before I thought about it when I was answering that. If you're doing interview style, some of the most valuable time with your guest is the like 5 to 10 minutes before recording and 5 to 10 minutes after. I've built more relationships in those 5 to 10 minutes than anywhere else because you've probably never met them. So they get on the call and you're kind of like, hey, like, tell me about you. Like you talk a little bit and then you're like, okay, I'm going to hit record. We do it. Then you get done and you're like, hey, that was awesome. Like so cool. And you can kind of dive into some of the topics. I've had calls where it's like the podcast was scheduled for an hour and then we talked for an hour after it. So like, don't sleep on the ability to, respect their time. So obviously, if you're coming up on the hour, you're like, hey, we only have this scheduled, and join the convo if you got more time. But don't sleep on the opportunity to like build a relationship before and after recording the podcast.
Great. And so what are some of the logistics of, so for you, it's been like some lead gen, Justin. So do you have like a form for people to fill out that have been like podcast guests and then like want to sign up, or do they just go through like your normal prospect channel then after? Or do you like have any sort of something special for them, I guess?
So like if I'm taking a guest and like treating them like a prospect.
No, I get like for people that do convert to your clients. So if people are going to launch a podcast and as some like lead gen, so they want to do an interview style with their niche so they can get those folks on their podcast and then maybe they'll become clients down the road. I guess like, do you do any follow up with them like a prospect, or do they just come to you naturally? Or can you talk to us about like what that looks like in terms of nurturing that relationship afterwards, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question and something to highlight. Don't treat them like a prospect unless they like indicate that they're a prospect. Because that's like a quick way to ruin the relationships, and then the reputation will get around in your niche of like, he's just doing this. You know what I mean? So like, if they never indicate that they're, interested in talking more or anything like that, and like, cool, like you've got a friend in that niche, and like leave it at that. But a lot of times if they're interested, they'll be like, I should really like, we should hop on like another call to talk about my finances. And then you can, okay, now we take them through the normal prospect, process that you have of, okay, let's schedule an intro call, da, 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 da. That's how I've always done it. I don't treat them like they're a prospect unless they indicate that. And I don't try and sell them. I think that's probably a quick way to ruin a lot of relationships, in my opinion, but that's just one man's opinion. I haven't done this in a little while. But I would add them to my email list, where the only thing I was really doing with the email list was sending out the weekly podcast. But even then, like they usually kind of hop off the email list because they didn't really ask, to be honest. So I don't really do that anymore. But you could if you wanted to.
Got it. So wait for them to initiate before you treat them at all like a prospect, basically.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
What do you think, Colton?
Yeah, I agree with what Justin said, 100%. I wouldn't push it. I think that will leave a bad taste in most people's mouths if they get invited on and then you turn around and try to push something. If they bring it up, great, but don't. I wouldn't push that. I mean, maybe like this is a stretch. I never did this, but if you wanted to, as you're inviting them, kind of offer something as a thing to get them on, you know what I mean? Maybe, but I never did that because that wasn't my main focus, to sign the guests as clients. It was for the relationships and then the spreading that message and that content.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And to be honest, a lot of people that have reached out to me are people that haven't really interacted with stuff directly, no message or anything like that, but they've been watching and then they book a call.
Okay.
Right? It's not always the people that are the most vocal up front about what you're doing. Like I'll get something like, oh, this person's been following me for like 3 months or 4 months. I haven't really seen anything from them. They've watched some stories on Instagram or something, or they liked some posts, but we haven't actually interacted beyond that. But clearly something's resonating. You know what I mean? And so I wouldn't push it too hard with the guests.
How much time does this take? So every week you guys are putting out episodes. So all in from recording to editing to getting it posted, how much time does this take for you guys, Justin? You want to start us?
Yeah, I'll take this one because I do most of this.
On the
yeah. So for the co-hosted ones, not that long because so this is like something to think about when you're recording, right? An hour episode is an hour to record. It's probably an hour and a half to edit and listen back to it. And then podcast description, 5-10 minutes, and then you launch. And then if you're going to cut it up into clips, probably another hour or two, right? So you're looking at probably 4 to 5 hours per episode. So depending on what your consistency is, if you're going per week, you could easily get 4 to 5 hours. So if you shorten your episodes, you can shorten the time to produce and to kind of edit that. So I try and hit like 30 to 40 minutes on interviews, and then that kind of shortens it. So it'll be like 40 minutes. It'll be an hour to record because I'm always, a little bit before, a little bit after, and then probably about an hour to edit. And then it probably takes me an hour or two to kind of cut up a bunch of clips and post those. So I'm going to say 4 to 5 hours. Colton and I, when we do co-hosted episodes, they're a lot shorter because we recognize you can't, like, maybe you can, but like nobody wants to listen to us for 40 minutes talk about a finance topic. So we try and go like 15 to 30 minutes and just keep it short, sweet, and like to the point. And those are obviously a little bit easier to just edit and kind of put out there.
So keep them short for good time management, sounds like.
It helps because, that 15 minutes that you go long on recording, like adds up to like an hour, hour and a half on the back end.
You don't need a Kitsis or like a Joe Rogan length podcast to make it successful.
Yes, because not everyone has a giant team behind them as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Dump the files to somebody,
Right.
and that's a different conversation, right? Then, yeah, record, a good hour, hour and a half if you want to. But if you're doing it, longer the recording, the more it's going to take. Definitely worth keeping in mind.
And like anything else you do, like create a workflow. Have a workflow where you can kind of walk through it to keep yourself organized, and have like a post-launched episode workflow as well. I think a lot of people, they launch it and then it's just like they don't talk about it again. Like it's not the field of dreams, you know what I mean? Like you can't just build it and they come. Like we got to talk about it. And so once you post that, have a post-episode workflow of like when you're launching on social media, like re-mention it a couple months later. You can also, I find it's helpful, especially early on, offer to send the raw video clips to your guest. That's like if they're a little bit of a bigger guest and you're thinking like, hey, how can I sweeten the pot to get them to say yes? Hey, it's for them, it's like, oh, okay, free content, because they probably have a team. If they're a little bit bigger, more established, they'll just send the raw clips to their team and be like, hey, cut this up, because they're going to go on, they're going to do their thing, they're going to talk about whatever it is their expertise is. And then now they've got an hour long or 30-minute long video of them talking. They just produce clips. So at the beginning, I offered that a lot, and I still, if anyone asks for it, I send it over. So that's another good way to kind of get people to say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ask for anything in return for that? Like, be sure to backlink to me or tag me in this if you do share anything like that.
Not directly, but I'll say, hey, this was awesome conversation. Really loved it. I'm going to launch this probably about blah, blah, blah. So, let them know kind of roughly when it's going to launch. I'll post on Instagram, LinkedIn. I'll be sure to tag you. Would love if you could, reshare it. And usually they'll kind of be like, yeah, no, I'll definitely reshare that type of thing. Because you just kind of give them a heads up. They know what to expect. And sometimes, like I've had other podcast guests say this to me, and I've done this before, is like, so let's say I've got like a backlog. So Amy, we recorded a month ago and I'm going to launch the episode today. I might message you yesterday and be like, hey, Amy, like just heads up, it's launching tomorrow. So you'll start seeing some clips come out. So now you're like, okay, you're watching for it, right? Whereas if I didn't tell you and you kind of forgot you recorded this and I start posting clips, you're like, maybe you haven't checked social media in, half a day. And so it's helpful if when you post it, like pretty quickly after, your guest kind of sees it and does something with it. But they don't always, so you can't control it, but you can just try and set yourself up for success by just setting expectations.
Yeah, well, that's really helpful. Well, we are almost to the top of the hour here. That flew by. So I think we have some great content for anyone thinking about launching a podcast. I'm going to put a link to your podcast. Everyone listen to Intentional Profits to see how it's done well. Thank you both, Justin and Colton, for coming on today. If anyone has more questions about membership with XYPN, we're going to drop a link in the chat to register for a call with one of our success strategists. We would love to talk to you. Also, be sure to fill out that survey for us. Let us know how we did. We all love feedback, and tell us any topics you'd like to see in the future. Well, that's it, guys. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. And if anyone wants to connect for advisors, you can find me on LinkedIn, Justin Green.
Yeah, I'm not on LinkedIn too much, but yeah, Colton Etherton. You can find me on there too.
Instagram for both of you.
Yeah, or Twitter or Instagram.
Perfect. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Bye.